What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 669. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me all on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how's your week been?
Oh, it's been good. Busy as usual, but I've gotten out of the sickness zone, so that's a pretty huge upside. I'll say.
Yeah, you sound great. I'm really happy to hear it because you were carrying around something for a while there. It was one of those kind of lingering things, right?
Yeah. It was like lingering colds that doesn't quite release its grasp.
Yeah, so annoying. It's tough to feel like you can get out of it, but I'm glad you're feeling much better. I just had like 2 wisdom teeth out voluntarily for some reason. Like at this point, I'm asking myself why I agreed to do it, but basically I didn't have to do it, but my dentist recommended it because he said that they can cause issues as you age, and I'm already pretty old, so I figured I'd be nice to even older version of myself and have that done. But now I'm recovering from having 2 teeth pulled, and it freaking sucks. I've had about enough soup and mashed potatoes for one lifetime, but otherwise I'm doing okay, and thankfully I'm well enough to do the show here and no pain or anything like that. So that's really good. And we're going to be talking on the show this week, by the way, about Sealed. And the reason for that is the Arena Open is this weekend. And so for anybody who's hoping to play in it, well, this is going to be your way to understand the differences between the draft and the sealed format if you've done a bunch of drafts like I have, but haven't done any sealed, like sadly I have. I lost track of it. I didn't realize until yesterday or today that the Arena Open was coming up this weekend, and I had my dental surgery lined up, and it kind of crowded out my desire to play. And so now I feel a bit behind. So I'm kind of putting myself in the shoes of many of our listeners, Luis, and I'm going to let you kind of guide the ship as far as telling us what your experience with Sealed has been. And then I'm going to take that advice and I'm going to win the day one of the Arena Open based solely on your advice. So don't screw up. Before we get into it, that main topic, though, we've got a few things to mention. First off, we mentioned it a long time ago, but with the merger, purchase, acquisition, however you want to put it, between Tcg Player and CFB Pro, we do have a bit of a change here as far as our affiliate status goes. I'm putting a link in the show notes, and that's how you do the affiliate now, and it goes to Tcg Player. So first things first is we want to mention the Tcg Player Marketplace. Look, this is the original Magic Marketplace, and they are massive, absolutely huge. All the benefits that we've talked about with CFB Marketplace count for the TCG Player Marketplace, but it's even bigger. And that means that you have more selection, more options, more things to choose from as far as price, condition, shipping, ratings on the sellers, all of that kind of stuff from TCG Player. And, they've long been the biggest fish in this particular pond, right? Just as far as sheer size goes, TCG Player has been massive for a very long time. And that does convey certain benefits. And as I said, when it comes to selection and all that kind of stuff, TCG Player Marketplace is definitely a great place to go to pick up all of your singles or sealed product or anything like that. So I'm putting a link in the show notes for every episode going forward. And it actually has our affiliate link as well. So if you click on that, it's just at any point, and then anything that you purchase from that, it lets them know that you came from us, that we're the ones who told you about this and we're the ones who recommended it. And we really appreciate it if you click on that, as it does help out the show. And, can't recommend them higher. I mean, let's be honest, there's multiple very good sources for getting your Magic cards out there, right? And TCG Player is 100% one of them, and I can recommend them without reservation. Now, CFB is not gone. And if you want content, CFB Pro, that is still the place to go. They really do have some of the best content creators around, particularly like people who want to improve, like probably you if you're listening to this podcast. And CFB Pro is absolutely fantastic. I have a link in the show notes to that as well if you're interested in checking it out. So we just want to thank both TCG Player and Channel Fireball for their support of the show. And we'll move on from there. The show's also brought to you, of course, by FTX. That's a place to go to manage all of your digital assets. If you're in the market for that right now, or if you think you might be down the line, take a look at it. You want to kind of get used to and educate yourself about that space, about the different ways that things work and the technologies that are being implemented, how they're being implemented. There's numerous different ways that happens. And you really want to kind of get yourself in that mindset, understanding what's going on there. And then when you're ready to invest or to check it out or to actually put something into it, FTX is a great place to go. It's ftx.us within the United States and ftx.com outside. Of course, they also have an app. And as we always remind you, if you do decide to do an investment of this kind, you should always consult an investment professional, because neither Luis nor I are that. And there are risks, and you have to understand that. Just like in any game of Magic, you have to understand the risks and the rewards to what you're undertaking before you undertake it. Otherwise, you just don't know what you're doing, and you can find yourself in some trouble. So what you want to do is get that information, get it ready, and then when you're ready, you head on over to FTX. We thank them for their support of the show as well. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. And we've got a patron question of the week. This one comes from our old friend Alex Ullman. And Alex says, hey guys, might be asking a question out of my own self-interest here, but I wanted to get your thoughts. If a mechanic, as in a set mechanic, is great for limited, but causes problems in constructed, should it be featured in a set? Likewise, if a mechanic is fantastic for constructed, but bogs down limited games, should it be a main feature? How much of a tax in one area is worth the benefit in the other? And he does clarify and says, this question brought to you by Monarch and Initiative and Popper. And Alex, of course, is kind of the Popper guy. And he writes articles and all that kind of stuff about Popper as well. And apparently Monarch and Initiative have had a big impact on Popper. I can glean that from this.
So this is kind of a tricky question because it's, like many questions, context matters a lot. It's hard to imagine a good mechanic there's not that many good mechanics that actually fall into these categories, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I just don't, I think Monarch and Initiative are just not good mechanics,
okay.
So I agree they're causing problems in Pauper, but I'm not sure that I buy that they're good. I think Monarch, I can't speak to how it is in Commander, which is clearly what it's designed for, but I can tell you that it's not a particularly good limited mechanic.
Mm-hmm. So the question that he's asking is, when do you make that trade-off? But you're saying, well, there's not even a trade-off happening here because these mechanics just are fundamentally not great.
I just think most of the time that you say, well, this mechanic's great for limited but causes real problems in constructed, or it's great for constructed but doesn't play in limited, that's not really what's going on. I think that usually just is the sign of a not great mechanic, but that's totally fine. We can still answer the original question because there are some examples. Delve, I think, is a pretty decent example of a mechanic that was a lot of fun and limited, right? In cons, Delve was really sweet.
It's a really good example, yeah.
Caused huge problems in constructed, right, with fetch lands and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ultimately it's generally not worth making a mechanic that makes limited better but constructed quite a bit worse, and kind of vice versa. You can usually just do a better job of steering yourself away from those kinds of mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at Delve, for example, let's say you really wanted Delve, right? That's where you exile cards from a graveyard to make a card cheaper. In constructed, that just means people play fetch lands and 1 mana blue spells to draw a card and fill up their graveyard and Mishra's Baubles and just go from there. But in limited, it played great. Just maybe make Delve cards that are more aimed towards limited than constructed.
It's interesting because you say that, and I think that that's true. But the one card that kind of crosses that intersection that I was surprised to see play, but if it was the only one that saw play, wouldn't have been an issue. So it backs up your point, is Hooting Mandrills.
Remember Mandrills?
Isn't that the one that was right?
Yep.
Where
5
that was
green for a 4/4 trample, and and you can delve to make it cheaper. And that card sees not anymore really, but it has seen varying amounts of legacy play.
Right. And to me, that's the sweet spot, right? Because there were some push Delve cards that we were like, oh God, right? This is going to, and it did. And they saw extensive, play. I mean, if you remember the Treasure Cruise and Delve Through Time red blue deck, and I think it was Modern for a week or whatever, they let it be legal, right? I mean, those type of things just got absolutely ludicrous. But it is interesting because, again, to back up your point, when they hit the balance, it's like, okay, that wouldn't have been too offensive. But I will say, when I saw Hooting Mandrills in legacy lists, I was like, oh boy, that means that anything above that is basically broken.
Yeah, and it's really hard to get that right. Like that's the kind of power level balancing that like it's almost impossible to nail exactly right. So it's not a surprise to me that Delve ended up, being a little too busted. But in general, I would say if a mechanic is causing significant problems in one of your two formats, that usually is a reason to be a little skeptical of the mechanic.
Okay.
Like I would Magic have been better if Delve wasn't a mechanic that ever existed? Yeah, I mean, maybe you can make an argument for it at least.
You definitely could, yeah. But I think you could definitely say that limited would have been worse. Like that was an interesting, fun, relatively balanced mechanic.
Yeah, and I think overall, WotC, I can't really speak to what their goals are exactly. If I were prioritizing there, I probably wouldn't want, like I would be more inclined to say like, hey, this mechanic's great and constructed, but bad and limited. Okay, put it on some rares and make it not show up in limited that much. Mm-hmm. If a mechanic's great and limited but messes up constructed, well, that's a little harder. Probably just don't do the mechanic because you can easily balance mechanic by using rarity so that it doesn't show up as often in limited, where like it kind of doesn't matter that a couple rares and some mythics are too good. Like obviously it's not ideal, right? Like, Pack Rat and Glorybringer, I think were a net negative to the format, but it didn't really change it that much. I don't really think. Like I never was like, oh, I don't want to draft this format because Glorybringer's in it,
No, totally. It does, by the way, and this topic comes up somewhat frequently for us. And I think that this is another time when it starts to shine, which is like they've taken some baby steps towards this with the booster, with the way that they do the booster drafts with the draft and the collector boosters and stuff, set boosters. But is there a reckoning at some point where like what is the compulsion to try to solve all these problems with certain types of product, like packaged products? Meaning, why don't they just have straight up draft boosters that have cards in them that are tailored for limited? And yeah, I may have some constructed applications as well where, they've broken out Commander product, right? It's its own thing. Yet it seems like trying to cram everything into one booster pack is getting harder and harder for them as the game becomes more popular in different ways. And it always makes me wonder, does that break at some point where they go, we just can't do all the things we want with a booster pack, and therefore we're going to start designing things separately,
I mean, we've already kind of seen that, right?
We've seen the draft boosters and the set boosters. So there's a step in that direction, but for whatever reason, it doesn't feel like they've really fully divorced those things. Like we still have cards that are clearly made for constructed in our limited sets. For example, like the cycle of rares in this set that care about creature type and you just ignore them all. Like they never even hit the battlefield, like those are just sort of wasted slots for us limited players type thing. And then of course for constructed players, like most of the time 13 or 14 out of the 14 cards in the pack are also wastes, because like people only play with like a very small subset of rares basically now. I don't know. It's an interesting bigger picture topic that we've touched on here and there.
I think at the end of the day, the answer to Alex's question really is, as a designer, I kind of get alarm bells going off if a mechanic's really good in one and really bad in the other, right? Also, constructed versus limited isn't really the whole story because Monarch's for Commander. I wouldn't even say it's for constructed exactly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And and I mean, the fact, I guess what you would say is that might have been aimed at Commander, but it's very much a constructed, it's a mechanic that's played in constructed heavily. So.
Yeah, but I think it's bad for constructed,
right,
and also bad for limited.
Right.
I think Monarch's a really unfun one-on-one mechanic. Again, not speaking to how it plays in a four-player game. Just in the one-on-one sense, if you're playing this and your opponent can't attack you right away, like the game feels like it's over.
Well, I know you've been having people come over and you've been playing some 6-player Commander at your place, trying out your wacky new builds. So you probably play some Monarch in there. Right?
But it's a good question, though. It's a good way to think about it.
Thanks for that, Alex. We appreciate your questions as always, and make sure you check out Alex's content for Pauper if you're into that format. That's commons only.
I mean, one of the decks that got a bunch of cards banned in Pauper recently was Lotus Petal, Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, and a bunch of initiative cards, which is basically the new version of Monarch.
Oh, really?
A bunch of 4 to 5 mana creatures that have initiative, and then a bunch of them got banned as a result.
Wow.
Funnily enough, the Lotus Petals and Dark Rituals didn't get banned, but I mean, treat the symptom, not the underlying cause, is a really classic approach with banning. So
yeah, that's tough. And I'll put, by the way, if anybody is interested in Alex's work, I'll put a link to his Twitter and to his website in there. He's written for Channel Fireball. He has his own website called Nerd to the Core, where he does updates on this stuff. He also has written for Wizards of the Coast on coverage and stuff. He's a dyed-in-the-wool hardcore Magic and specifically Pauper person, and he's a great follow as well. So I'll put that in the show notes too. And again, thanks for the question, Alex. Okay, Luis. So pretend as if I haven't played a single sealed. And just pretend that, and teach me how to play this format so that I don't screw it up this weekend.
You're in luck because there was an arena qualifier a couple weekends ago if you got 6 wins unsealed, you qualified for like a qualifier weekend, qualifier for a qualifier for a qualifier as per the usual. And then also because it's been RCQ season and I've got friends who are playing locally, I've done some actual physical seals, which is kind of funny. I hadn't done that for a while, but we had a cabin weekend once, and our friend Caroline brought a box of Dominaria and just built a bunch of seals, and we kept the pools together and had different people build them and stuff. But that
was in between Commander.
That was in between our games of Commander. My kind of result for this is good news for you, because I think you'll be in good shape, which is most of the time you're going to play Domain. That is actually, I think, the dominant sealed strategy. So if I had to break down Dominaria Sealed to kind of 4 points here, the first is true of every sealed format so far, which is play your best cards. Like the best cards in limited these days, are quite a bit better. It's not a linear scale; it's a logarithmic scale where a 10 is a lot better than a 9, which is a lot better than an 8. Right. And if you open a Shieldred, it's got to be in your final deck. I don't really care what process you have to get to do that, but it's really hard for me to not believe that Shieldred is a card that you should be playing in your deck. Okay. And I would be extremely skeptical that isn't a card, or you open the Green Defiler, right? These are all cards like you got to make them work. Number 2 is see if you have all the lands and fixing to just play all the cards. Just play every good card that you can. Obviously you still want to end up on 23 land or whatever, but or 23 spells, 17 land. But for the most part, you want to do your best if you've got the fixing to just get all the good stuff in. Why not? Number 3, make sure you have enough interaction. This is sealed. Your opponent's going to have things you want to kill, things you got to get rid of, and it's important that you're able to interact with what they're doing. So you want to make sure that you've got enough ways to interact, and that's not usually a huge problem, given where sealed, what good sealed decks land on. But it does mean that you might have to pick a different color combination or a splash based on what you're seeing, because you do need to be able to deal with opposing cards. Okay. And then last is, if you have a strong synergy or aggro theme, you can consider it, but it's unlikely. The things like the spells deck with Tolarian Terror or the tokens deck, I'm not saying you can't play these cards or decks, because sometimes you do. I've definitely had like 2 different spells decks, for example, that felt like more like a draft deck than a sealed deck. But most of the time, you're not going to do that, because you're going to have 1 Tolarian Terror, and you're not going to have the ability to like draft 14 spells. So don't go out of your way looking for that. And likewise, aggro is in sealed typically not that good, and that's just been true of almost every sealed format, Zendikar aside.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of similarities between not exactly how I approach draft, but it's not that far off, right? With like I wouldn't say that I take the approach of like every deck is Domain and I'm trying to play every good card I see. That is not how I play it, but it's closer to that, than it would be in any normal set.
Yeah, I think in sealed, my guess is that about 75% of the sealeds I've done are like 4 or 5 color just Domain. Like 15% are probably 15 or 20% even 2 to 3 color like kind of normalish decks, and then the other 5 or 10% being like kind of an aggro strategy that typically doesn't work that well.
Okay.
So it's funny when you open a sealed deck, especially on Arena, the first thing you see is all your rares, and that's just what you do in general, right? Obviously, when you sit down at the PTQ and you get your pool, you're like, what are my rares?
Right, you shortcut to that, yeah.
Because I mean, your rares are also a big part of like what are you gonna build? You look at and you try to see what good rares you have. The second thing though is you look at how many lands you have, because the common cycle of lands will actually give you a lot of your direction. Because if you have 3 lands, 4 lands, probably can't build a straight up domain deck unless your green's really carrying with 3 or 4 fixers.
Right.
If you have 7 lands, probably can just do whatever you want. It's not quite that simple, but that is a pretty good heuristic. And when you have enough lands that you can build the decks you want to build, and you can build a 5-color deck, that's often what you want to be doing. So when you break down a domain deck, most of them are base green, because green has multiple common fixers with like the Flurfur's Vine Wall and the 1/1 Death Touch Gardener, and then it has the Weatherseed Treaty at uncommon, and Sprouting Goblin is a red-green card at uncommon as well.
And then
and Scout the Wilderness as common.
Right.
So between all those cards, base green makes sense, because if you even have 2 fixers, well, it makes sense to make sure you have 8 green sources, and it'll depend on the non-basic lands you open, of course, but getting those 2 fixers in kind of adds 1, especially if it's like a search for a land, adds 1 to every other color you have, right? Mm-hmm. So you end up in a spot.
These ones that are maybe borderline in draft, are they just in? Like, are you playing all the Deathbloom Gardeners and the Search the Wildernesses and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you're clearly always playing Vine Wall and Weatherseed Treaty, because those are just great cards.
Those are just really good cards, yeah.
I have yet to cut either of the other 2 from a base green deck, but you don't always play base green. Like, if I had a Deathbloom Gardener and a Scout and no other fixing, I might be like, I maybe want to be base like blue-black, but be domain. And you can do that if you have enough of the cards. Like, kind of the way I look at it is like green has the fixers, right? Blue has Impulse and Cantrips and like Phyrexian Espionage. Black has Shadow Prophecy and Phyrexian Rager, and then white has a bunch of cheap removal like Artillery Blast and Runic Shot. Those are all reasons to maim those colors.
I see.
Like, you can be blue domain if you have 2 Impulses and a Phyrexian Espionage, right? You're pretty happy. You get to use those cards to fix your mana as needed.
Right. I don't want to. I hope I'm not stepping on something down the line here, but I am curious about, like, what about those secondary quality fixers like Inscribed Tablet, Meteorite, Relic of Legends? Like, are you more open to those cards in Sealed?
Yeah, Relic of Legends and Meteorite I think are fine. I try not to play Inscribed Tablet. Part of the problem I have with the tablet is it doesn't actually fix your mana in the right way.
Yeah, it might. It might.
That's
all I can
Vine Wall
promise.
also might, but Vine Wall sees an additional card, and Inscribed Tablet just 2 mana to do nothing to the board, whereas getting an O2 is a very big difference. There's a reason one of those cards is better than the other, right?
Yeah, totally. And, I'm assuming Salvaged Mana Worker, that's the 2 mana 1/3 that you can filter a mana once per turn. Like, that's not on the menu still as well, or?
The better your deck is, the more likely I am to play that card, because if you have awesome card quality and you're a little short on fixing, like, this is where the whole Shieldred thing comes back, right?
I see.
Imagine that you had a Shieldred and like a Vidalian Mindsinger. Mm-hmm. At that point, like, I want to play both those cards so badly because they're both just absurd cards. But, if I don't have the fixing, the Salvage Mana Worker can make it so you can cast your spells.
Pixie Illusionist for fixing?
Oh, I like Pixie Illusionist a lot in general if you're a base blue.
Okay.
Because the 1/1 version, sure, it's not your first choice, but it still does what you need it to do.
Okay.
And then the 3/3 version is just a good card. Like, 3/3 flyers continue to be good, All
right. Yeah, I wanted to feel that out, because I kind of have a line in draft where I'm like kind of not willing to play some of those cards that we said, or I really try to avoid it, or I feel like my deck has somehow gone off the rails if I do end up playing it. But with even a little bit more time, that might open the door for those, and that seems to be the case here.
Yeah, so once you've picked your primary color, you usually pick your secondary color, because you don't always have one. So sometimes you just have a primary color. You're like, I'm playing 4 forests, one of each other dual or one of each other basic, and then I have like a grotto and like 8 duals, and I'm just green 5 colors, right? Sometimes you're like, okay, I'm going to play 3 plains and 4 islands, and then I'm going to play a bunch of non-basics or a bunch of basics of each color or one of each, and then a bunch of non-basics, and I'm kind of like blue-white with blue with for impulses and white for artillery blasts, kind of making this all work.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing to note is whatever your primary and secondary colors are, those are the ones that can a little bit more easily play double color cards. Because something like Extinguish the Light, the 2 black kill any creature, you can't necessarily play that in your 5 color deck because double color is a real ask.
Right. Even more so than 2 colors, but they're different.
Right. Certainly. And when you're in that spot, you often are going to want to pick and choose which color gets to play the double color cards. Because if you don't have like 7 sources, like playing a double color card off 5 sources, especially if one of the sources is like, a Weather Seed Treaty that's not always going to be able to get a swamp or whatever, that you do end up in a kind of tough spot. Part of the reason to play Domain is to play other good cards, so try to do that. And you want to lean more towards the late game, and that's not a surprise. That's what these decks do even in draft. But even more than in draft, I'm a little more inclined to like try to get the blue count up to play Erdai Scorn, which is the cancel, right? Try to, I'm definitely not leaving Joda's Codex on the side in any way, shape, or form. So you want to be able to play kind of your good late game stuff and just lean towards that because you're not getting attacked very often in Sealed. You really aren't.
Okay.
So moving on from the Domain decks, you have like that kind of 2 to 3 color decks, and the 2 main reasons you end up here, the most common one is you just don't have the lands. You can't swing playing all 5 colors. You've got 4 lands. They're not even like 2 of them are black-white lands, and and that's not even where your best cards are. You're just like, okay, I can't make this work. The second most common is you just have a really deep pool, like you have a really deep blue-black pool, and you don't need to actually mess up your mana, and you can just play 8 islands, 8 swamps, a contaminated aquifer, and then just go from there with actual good mana, and just you're not making too many concessions on card quality. Okay,
and if that happens, just take the gift and go with it.
Yeah, I mean, you still ideally get to play your good cards. You don't really, you don't want to leave like an Archangel of Wrath in your sideboard if you can avoid it.
Right.
But I've had Sealed decks where it's like, hey, I've got 2 great colors here. Why mess with that? Or you have the let's say the same blue-black deck, but you're splashing green because you've got Urborg Repossession and a Terra Sunder. And then you have, I actually have a blue-green land and a grotto. So yeah, this works. So it's not always a consolation prize to end up 2 colors or 2 in a splash. Sometimes it's just because you actually have a deep enough pool. But most of the time I've ended up there, it's because I just don't have the lands to play all 5. So I have to leave a couple good cards on the board and play like a Grixis or Esper deck and get most of my good cards in instead. So one thing to note about these decks is they don't actually tend to be green very often, because if your green's good enough, it usually means you have green fixers, which usually means you can play 4 or 5 colors. So when I talk about a 2 or 3 color deck, I often do mean Grixis, Esper, Jeskai. Like these are the kinds of decks that end up kind of showing up when you're not playing full Domain, because if you were playing green, then you would have easily just gotten to full Domain that way.
Right. So it's kind of weird to like imagine a deck that has that many colors but doesn't have that, right? Like they kind of go hand in hand.
So the other thing to look out for when you're playing these decks is that you get a little bit more in the realm of synergy. Firstly, because you're not playing just all good cards. The 5 color decks don't really need synergy that much because they're just like, I'm going to play the, all my good green cards plus the 3 best cards out of the other 4 colors.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not really trying to combine that much. Sometimes you have the defender theme, right? But for the most part, the 5 color decks are just like quality card after quality card. All the cards stand on their own. When you're playing a 2 or in a splash or a 3 color deck, the door opens a little more for you to actually be doing something like a spells theme or a tokens theme, the defender theme, depending on which colors you are, because you have this kind of critical mass of those cards. If you told me, hey, I actually had a pretty deep pool and I built a blue-red deck, I would kind of expect you to have like a little bit of a spells theme. Maybe you have a Tolarian Terror and a Balmor in your deck.
Okay.
Right? Because you just naturally have 9 spells. And or you're playing black-white because you just got some good black-white rares and a deep card quality. But it wouldn't surprise me that you had a Phyrexian Warhorse, a Captain's Call, and and you're just kind of going that direction as well, where you have a couple token synergies, like Bone Splinters is actually good in your deck, that sort of thing.
Right.
Lastly, we have aggro, and again, I still don't really believe in aggro because you just don't get the like 6 to 8 2-drops that you want to really manage an aggro deck. Because what happens if you don't have enough cheap cards, if you don't have a good enough curve, you end up playing a game where you don't finish them off. You maybe get them low, but you don't quite finish them. And then you are then drawing 2-mana 2/2s or 2-mana 3/1s or whatever, 3-mana 2/3 menaces, and they're drawing 5-mana 10/10 Morrows or, casting Urborg Repossession and getting back 2 great cards. So if you have the cards to make aggro, it can be effective. When you're playing against someone who half their lands come into play tapped and sometimes they're missing a color and don't play a card on turn 4, sure. I mean, a red-white deck that has a good curve will actually exploit that. So it's a kind of funny spot where generally you shouldn't play aggro, but when you should play aggro, it actually can be a great option.
So if I handed you an aggro deck, given what you know about how people play the format, you would be happy with that. It's just that it doesn't come up often enough. Like, you can't make that happen.
Right. I think that...
Because, some formats aren't even that amenable. Like, I could be like, look, I'll give you a good aggro deck. And you'd be like, I don't really want it. Like, everybody's playing mid-range. I'm just going to lose anyway.
Yeah. And I think that you end up in a spot where if you have the cards for it, aggro can actually deliver, but it is not easy to end up there.
Okay. But it's worth keeping your eye open for. It's just don't get too hopeful about that.
Yeah. If you were to tell me, hey, the time traveling supercomputer has determined this pool should be aggro. Do you want this pool or a random pool? I would probably take the pool that should be aggro in the dark, because if it actually should be aggro, that usually means that the deck is going to be good for the format.
Right.
But most of the time it shouldn't be. Just keep an eye on it. The most common aggro color is red-white, though black-white can sometimes get there. And there is the possibility of a blue-white Flyers deck that kind of neatly straddles the line between aggro and like, kind of tempo. So
that's interesting.
And the cards that go in that deck are actually good. Like, Protect the Negotiators, Essence Scatter, Urtai's Scorn, like the counter spells are good against the domain deck. So you can actually take advantage of them pretty nicely there.
Okay.
I want to talk about some sealed specific cards. So Broken Wings, I would main deck. This is the Destroy an Artifact, Enchantment, or Flyer. I think it's worth main decking. People have, Joda's Codex is a card that gets played in probably 90% of the pools that it's opened. People typically have like a flying, big flyers if they get those and all that sort of thing. I actually would not main deck Negate. That is so far not been a card.
I'm surprised to hear you say that.
Yeah, I've tried it a few times, and honestly, it's just not been that good. Part of the problem is a lot of the good plays are just creatures, and when you have Negate and they play a good creature, like the domain decks, a lot of their good cards are creatures. So when they play a creature on turn 5 and you have a Negate up, it's pretty bad. So I would certainly keep that in mind. And look, it's not the end of the world if you want to main deck it, and it's obviously a great sideboard card if their deck is susceptible to it. But so far, I haven't liked main decking Negate.
Okay, that's interesting.
Destroy Evil, I think everyone's kind of on board with how good Destroy Evil is. So I think at this point, it's pretty clear that you should be playing as many Destroy Evils as you can get your hands on.
For sure.
Like, I don't think there's an upper limit. I mean, I guess maybe I wouldn't play the 4th, but I haven't run into that problem. And
right. In Sealed, you're playing all of them. Yeah. Yeah,
because not only do people have a lot of, pretty high quality big creatures, like Leyline Binding and Citizen's Arrest, like these are cards that you're going to be really happy to be able to destroy.
For sure. And those see pretty heavy play too, right?
Yeah. Urtai's Scorn. Counter. Good card. I would recommend playing that card.
Yeah, the 2 spells thing actually does pop up sometimes too.
Yeah, and that can also help with the colors too. Like it can make it easier on the colors to do that. Where you only have single blue, but sometimes they end up in a spot where they played 2 spells, and you're just like, actually, I'm just going to play both these right now.
Yeah, one of the things that's popped up quite a bit is when people use Urborg Repossession, especially if they can't kick it, and you got your Airtie Scorn, but you can't play the double blue. It's like, it all worked out. They cast it, then they cast the creature that they got, and then you just counter it, and even if you didn't have the double blue, it still works.
I would always play Shore Up, the blue untap a creature, give it hexproof +1/+1. Everyone just has a lot of removal. It's a great way to dodge that removal. I mean, always if blue's one of your primary colors, I would generally not splash this in your domain deck if blue's like a marginal color. But if blue's one of your primary colors, then I really like Shore Up because you probably will have something you want to protect.
Yeah.
And it's just quite a blowout when that actually does work. Tidepool Turtle. This is one I typically don't play in draft, but I think is actually worth playing in sealed.
Interesting. So what's the difference? This is the one that has the scry activated ability or whatever?
It's a 3 blue for a 2/5 with 2 blue scry.
Yeah.
It's not that the turtle all of a sudden gets great. It's still, I would say like a borderline card, but sealed's just a little bit slower, and that's enough of a difference for me to want to put the card in my deck.
Okay, interesting. That's a good one to know.
Yeah. Likewise, Aggressive Sabotage, the 2 black, they discard 2 cards, and if you kick it for a red, they also take 3 damage. Mm-hmm. Fine card to play.
Okay. Yeah.
Again, with all these cards, Shore Up, Turtle, Sabotage, I'm not talking about splashing them in domain, but if these are one of your primary colors, whether that's one of your colors in a domain deck that you have a lot of sources, or you're playing like a blue-black deck or something, mm-hmm. I think it is worth playing.
Okay, that's good.
So Choking Miasma, all creatures get -2/-2, and if you played the green kicker, you get a +1/+1 counter on your creatures. That is not a card I would main deck and sealed. Most decks are not very susceptible to it. What you do want to keep in mind, though, is it's a fantastic sideboard card. If you play against the Wingmantle Chaplain, the Walls deck, and they make a bunch of 1/1s, Miasma is one of the best ways to fight against that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It kills all the birds. It also kills vine walls and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's a good one, and keep it in mind when you have your deck that this is one of the things that should come up a lot in sealed. Less when you're just domain, but imagine you're like green and then secondary color white domain, and then you end up because you have like 2 artillery blasts, let's say, mm-hmm. and you've got some green fixing, you got some artillery blasts, but then you play against the Walls deck, and those artillery blasts aren't that good. You might want to switch to being green-black for Choking Miasma and stuff like that, because you can shift your primary color there. So just keep aware of your sideboard options, including switching colors. Sometimes like your blue-black splash red, but it was close, and then you play against someone where you actually should be blue-red splash green or something along those lines. Like that is very possible to occur. Pilfer, the 1 black, look at their hand, make them discard a card.
Oh yeah,
good card.
Yeah, I like that card.
I mean, I like that card in draft if I have a lot of early black sources, if I'm a black deck, and so I'm happy with it in sealed as well.
Yeah, I play that card in draft all day too.
And then Jaya's Fire NATO, the 5-mana DO5 at sorcery speed. Not like I'm loving this card, but you are going to want to kill their 3/3 flyer or what have you. Like that, this is a card I think that you should generally lean towards playing in sealed.
So you get a little bit more time to have enough mana to actually do that, and you can do it if you need to. Yeah. Okay.
And a card that I would not recommend playing is Smash to Dust, the destroy an artifact or a defender or deal 1 to your opponent's creatures. But even in sealed, I'm not into that. I just don't find that it has enough good targets. And we talked about it even on the last show about how this either sits in your hand, huge downside, or trades 1 for 1. And you don't usually have very many options as to what it trades for. So it's not going to be that good of a card, even when it does work.
Okay.
Yes, it's a fine card to sideboard in, but I have not wanted to main deck it. Expensive kicker cards get a little bit better. I generally play Elvish Hydromancer anyway. This is the 7-mana copy one of your creatures card, the 3/2. Yeah. And in sealed, of course, I'm pretty happy playing that card.
Because that card has proven to be a bit slow for draft. Still playable, like you said, but it's it doesn't, it's not like a bomb. It's not something you have to pick up really early, but definitely give it a little more breathing room and it would be even better.
Yeah, I would not. I would generally not want to play too many combat tricks. Stuff like Colossal Growth or.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah,
Guys Might. Guys Might is a little different because if you're a domain deck that has good mana, the rate on that card is just kind of absurd.
Yes.
But if you're also a 10 creature deck, and 2 of those creatures are Floriferous Vine Walls, you have a bunch of removal spells and a Jodos Codex, Guys Might's not really where you want to be either. So you do want to keep that in mind.
I assume stuff like Mossbeard Ancient, the 7 mana 7/7 trample that gains you 5 life is right in the sights of where you want to be.
Oh yeah, I mean I would say any card that costs 6 or more mana has gotten better.
Yeah.
And that card is already good.
Yeah. So, what about like Sunbathing Rootwalla?
Still good.
Good.
I mean, it's fine early and definitely carries its weight late. So pretty happy with that. Yavimaya Sojourner, the 8 mana 4/6 gets cheaper for your domain. It actually gets a little bit worse in Sealed than in Draft because you're not playing against aggro decks, and that's where this card is technically at its best. But I still play it on all my domain decks.
It's still good enough to make the cut. I was going to ask you about cards like that too. There's a kind of a subclass of cards that I read them as playable and will put them in my deck sometimes, but I actually try to avoid in Draft. My broad stroke strategy in Draft is try to pick up as many 2-for-1 creatures as I can, of which there are many in this format, and I try not to mess around much with the ones that aren't. So like a good example of a card that I see all the time across from me on the battlefield is Elfhame Worm.
Yep.
Right, which is a totally fine statted card at 5 mana, but I never play it myself because I'm just not interested in that type of creature, one that you just play. Linebreaker Baloth is similar. The 4/6 that you just mentioned, even though it can be quite powerful, even a card like Territorial Morrow fits that description somewhat, where it dies to a lot of removal and then it doesn't, and I haven't gotten anything out of the equation when there's so many cheap creatures that fill similar roles, like Sunbathing Rootwalla is a good example of that. It does a pretty good Territorial Morrow impression, but I only have to pay 2 mana for it. So I'm a little less bummed if somebody kills it. And then I'm trying to construct my game plan around getting 2-for-1s from these creatures and then backing those up with removal so that I can fight my opponent's stuff, and then card draw cards to keep the 2-for-1s flowing for me. Particularly, Urborg Repossession has become probably the most important card for me in the format, the most important common. It's the one that breaks the most games, I found. But I'm wondering, because I believe that, let's take Elfhame Worm as the example that I'm giving.
It's the poster child for this, right?
Right. It is the one.
Magnagoth Sentry, Elfhame Worm.
Yes.
The Molten Hellion or whatever.
Yes. The red one, the black one, the 5/5 Death Touch. Right. These ones that are fine cards, but they just are I am a creature. That's it. Part of the reason that I don't like them is because they're on the more expensive side. But the other part is because they don't feed into that sort of value engine, constant rolling value thing that I'm going for. But I'm wondering if I get a bit more time in Sealed, the expensive part is a little bit less pressure on it. Does that push those into playable for you? Are these important cards in the format? Or can I just keep taking my Phyrexian Ragers?
Look, your instincts as to which of these cards are better it holds up. Phyrexian Rager is better than Elfhame Worm. You'd rather have your high tier cards are cards like card draw, removal, and bombs like the 7 mana bomb or whatever.
Right.
But it is still fine to play some of these 4 and 5 mana kind of vanilla-ish creatures. It's better than playing something like Hexbane Tortoise, the 3 mana 3/2. That just doesn't have a good effect on the game.
Right.
But for the most part, yeah, you're fine playing these cards if you're short on playables. Look, Elfhame Worm isn't going to decide that many games, but it's still a fine card. I'd rather have it than a Bog Badger. I'd rather have it than a Barkweave Crusher. I'd rather have it than a Viashino Branch Rider. So I think that you can still play some of these a little bit more expensive cards. They're not your first choice, but they're still okay.
Right. And you know how it is with sealed, like you kind of, run what you brung, as they say, right? It's kind of like, well, this is, you don't get choices sometimes in that way. What about like a card like the World Spell? Is it slow enough so that you're like, hey, you know what? I'm base green. I got mana ramp. Like I'm going to run a World Spell in my deck.
I probably still wouldn't run it. I'm not that interested in a 7-mana card that doesn't affect the board.
Okay. And then the other question I have, because the other thing that I'm translating over from draft with regards to that broad stroke strategy that I said before, is that you still do need defensive speed in that. Like a card like Splatter Goblin can go a long way, right? To making sure that you don't get ran over. Sometimes I'll play Blight Pile even if I'm not really doing the walls thing, just because it eats up little creatures or it trades off for something that costs 3 or 4 mana sometimes. And I feel that that's a box that I have to check, because when you play draft, occasionally, not that uncommonly, you will run into red-white or white-black or even the blue-red deck sometimes that can get off to a quick start and run you over. And if you completely ignore that, you will get absolutely destroyed by those decks because of how, tap land, slow, kind of develop your game the rest of your deck is. Do I ignore, do I lower that criteria in sealed? Like, do I need to run a Splatter Goblin, or can I just ignore that?
You don't need to. It's not as critical as it is in draft. Okay. But Splatter Goblin is still an okay card if you're base black, just because. Yeah, I mean it will actually keep you alive if you play against someone who's got early creatures. And the other thing is, part of the reason Phyrexian Rager's so good, or you end up in a spot or Nishoba Brawler where your opponents do actually end up getting some early damage in, and taking 8 early damage, or if it's a Brawler, like 12, is going to make it harder for you to win the late game, even if the game's not really about aggro. Life total still matters. And then you have stuff like Raft, Weatherlight Stalwart, or Rada Coalition Warlord that get a lot better if you have another creature to make them better.
Okay. Yeah, I figured I couldn't. I mean, we have had sealed formats or even some draft formats where, like, if somebody played like a decent 2-drop, like what looked like a well-statted 2-drop, you would just kind of laugh, right? You're like, oh, right. You don't get it. Like that is not going to affect the outcome of this game at all. And in fact, you've effectively mulliganed by having that card in your deck and having drawn it. But I assume this format didn't slow down that much. So that backs up, what you said too.
Yeah. So you still, stats are still somewhat relevant, like especially if, there are some strong cards that do end up putting a little pressure on you. Talos Lookout, for example, right? The 4-mana 3/2 or flyer, or even Soaring Drake, the 3-mana 2/3 flyer. Mm-hmm. Like, those are cards that tend to see play, and you are going to get attacked by them if your opponent has them. So
so it's
you do have to respect them at least.
Are you Slimefoot surveying?
No, still not a big fan of that. And honestly, I've got to say that Timeless Lotus also hasn't really gotten there for me.
I think what you said was true. Like, there is a very narrow setting where that card can do some things. I mean, it is clearly a very powerful magic card, right? Like, it doubles your mana and fixes you and stuff. So it has something to do, but it just doesn't fit the bill. It's too slow. It's hard to take advantage of a mana jump that big, to make it worth it.
Yeah. So I have not. I'm not saying I don't play Timeless Lotus. I still think it's okay, but I do think that it's not been that a big of a game decider as I was hoping.
Okay, and you said before that the combat tricks are not a big part of the way that the games play out, generally speaking.
No, the combination of wanting to pack in all your removal, your opponent having a little more removal than normal, all that stuff is just like has kind of left you in a spot where it's hard to actually fit those in.
Okay. Is it fun? Is the format okay? Like, it seems like it would be a sweet one. Anytime there's domain and sealed, it seems like you can kind of do some fun stuff.
Yeah, no, I've generally been happy playing sealed. I think that it's got some good stuff going on, and I enjoy playing the domain decks in draft. That hasn't been different in sealed, right? So I'm pretty happy just getting to jam on those, and the fact that you most of the time build that in sealed, I think is pretty cool. The cards are fun. They play well.
What do you think of my chances of day twoing?
Oh, I mean, you're gonna day two because look, you're gonna play. I'm not saying you're gonna play 100 times or whatever, but like if you miss a couple times, you're gonna keep playing.
Oh, I'm gonna keep playing, buddy.
And I mean, you just had your wisdom teeth out. Where else are you going to go do? Eat
nothing
some more soup?
else to do. Yeah.
So you end up. I think I do want to mention, because we've talked about it when we first saw the arena opens. I don't know, but 2 years ago, year and a half ago, there was the debate of like, is it good for people that they get to rebuy as many times as you want? The way I kind of look at it is, don't do it if it stops being fun. If you hit the point where you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this no matter what. I'm in too deep. I don't want to stop. That's a point where you gotta take stock and be like, hey, is this actually worth the thing you're doing?
Right.
Because a lot of the times the answer is going to be no. But if you're like, oh wow, that was fun, but I didn't quite get there. Yeah, I mean that's fine. Just play another run or two and don't worry about it.
Yeah, another really easy thing to do for that, especially when it comes to the monetary side of it, is to decide before, not that day, but like the day before, I am going to do 3 bullets or 2 bullets. That's it. Like, if I don't get there, that's okay. There'll be another one in a little while. I'll prepare better. It just wasn't for me, and stick to it. Because I think the only time when it really starts to become unhealthy or, really bad is when you feel that you don't have control. Like when you feel like you're like, I'm just clicking this button, trying to get back in this thing, and I don't care about the money, and I don't care about that I was supposed to go do something today, or that I'm not having fun. And you get into that sort of inward looking mindset where you're just, tunnel visioning, that type of thing. Like I think we've all been there before. If you play a lot of games or, poker and stuff like that, it can bring that out in you. But one way to put a stop to it is to say, this is it. I have 2 shots at this. And if I don't get it, that's fine. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go, hang out with my dog or whatever. I've got plans today, and you do it. If you just leave it open-ended is when you can kind of find yourself in a spot where you're just like, hit the button again. Next thing you know, you spend a few $100s and you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah. I mean, you end up staying up till 2 a.m, and then like you finally get there and you don't even feel that good about it. So
no, it feels like a relief at the best, right? And that's not fun.
I could believe someone who's like, I'm on my 7th rebuy and I'm having a good time, and this is not irresponsible for me to do, and that's totally fine too.
Exactly. And I mean, I think that the way that these are set up is that as long as they're not predatory in the sense of like they're trying to entice you, right, to, hey, just buy in one more time and maybe you'll get there. Or maybe, some games are really nasty and will like give you little bonuses the further you go down those rabbit holes. And, that certainly isn't the case here. And, beyond that, it's up to us to regulate ourselves. So just make sure you do that. All I really want to see, Luis, is Urborg repossession, just however many of those I can get.
Yeah. Urborg repossession is a good one.
So critical to the way that I've played the format, and I feel like if my opponent resolves one, then I can't win. And if I do, then I can't lose. And it just seems like everything always revolves around that card now. Because what I've realized, is that there's a couple of twists to Urborg repossession. One of them doesn't come up very often, but when it does, it can be huge, which is that if you kick it, the second card you get can be any permanent.
You get a Saga back.
You get a Saga back, right?
And they blew up your Joda's Codex or whatever.
Right. You get a Codex or a Saga back, and it's dumb because the Sagas that you actually play are generally very, very good, right? Like there's kind of a delineation where there's a bunch of Sagas that are mediocre or don't see play, and then the rest are like the Cruelty of Gix or whatever, where it's like, oh, I buy that. It's like, okay, well, this game's over. So that's one little twist. But the more important one is that if you really try to stack your deck with 2-for-1 creatures rather than raw power standalone creatures, things that have ETB abilities, even if it's just making a token or, some of them are filtering, drawing you cards, etc., you're buying often 2 of those back. So your card draw spell normally draws you 2 cards, right? Let's say a divination type card that an Urborg repossession would roughly replace. And, the average value that you get out of that is about a spell, right? It's like a little more than a spell, because your deck is usually 23-17, right? So you get 1 spell and 1 land, something like that on a divination on average. And on Urborg Repossession, you're getting, in this format, the way that these decks actually play out, you're getting 2 spells basically every single time that you kick it. And then the 2 life doesn't hurt. And then oftentimes those 2 are also 2-for-1s that have already garnered you 2-for-1s, right? Like in the simplest manner, it's Phyrexian Rager, right? That's sort of the cleanest 2-for-1. You get a 2/2 body and a card in your hand, right? And if you play those and say trade them off for creatures and then Urborg Repossession them both back and replay them again, it's just a flood, right? It's an avalanche of value that you can get. And that, even though getting literally 2 Phyrexian Ragers doesn't happen very often, it is really not that uncommon to get like a Phyrexian Missionary like we've talked about before, and all of a sudden you have a board state again. It is a avalanche of time at times, and often the thing that starts that avalanche is the Urborg Repossession. So I'm really hoping to open a few of those in my first couple of sealeds and get the job done with that. That's my game plan, Luis. So
yeah, I mean, like I said, you may not have played this sealed format, but all the stuff you do in draft works pretty well in sealed, so you don't really need to change up. You don't have to draft the lands; they just show you how many you get. And
well, thanks for putting in the hard work for us to know.
Yeah, just the sealed format's been fun, and I'm looking forward to playing the open. So, hoping for good luck on day 2 at the very least.
Same thing here. Good luck, everybody. Playing in the open. Let us know how it went. We love seeing the screenshots of people qualifying for day 2 and then even cashing when we get into the day 2 runs on Sunday. Thanks again, Luis, for carrying the torch and here for this show. As I actually got through it okay, but it's not the most comfortable with 2 teeth down. But I appreciate it. Obviously, I'm going to get there on my first run as my first sealed of the format. I'll probably play a couple tonight, but that's how it goes, right? The times when I've practiced a whole bunch and then have to take 6 runs to get there, and then the time when I don't play it at all, I'm going to open some bomb pool and go, I don't get what the big deal is, and that'll be it. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR, Luis is LSV. Pretty much everywhere. We want to thank TCG Player /CFB for their support of the show. Again, link in the show notes for the TCG Player affiliate link. If you do need to pick up any cards from Dominaria United or anything, please use that link, and then it'll let them know that we sent you over, and we do appreciate it. Thanks again to FTX as well, and to our patrons for their support of the podcast. We'll be back next week. Luis, you're off next week, is that right?
Yeah, so the next time I record a show, I think it will be from a new place. So we're moving.
Oh, congrats. That's
just
awesome.
A couple blocks. So not the longest move, but moving still is tough. So next week, I'm going to take the week off so I can get that going. And
what's the office situation looking like at the new? Is there water in it yet, or is it squishy on the ground?
We're not moving because my office got destroyed, because our basement got flooded. Mm-hmm. But that certainly did kind of make me a little happier to do so, because we're still dealing with that, of course. But
man.
But yeah, I'm going to have a real life office again, and I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Well, congrats. That's really cool. I'm going to see if Sirkovitz can come on a little earlier this next week, and we can go over stuff with him.
I think his demand was that we buy him a new electric kettle. So you could talk to him about that.
His demands keep growing. We'll meet them. I love having Sirkovitz on the show. So I'll get a hold of him and see if he can come on as well. At any rate, thanks so much for hanging out, and we'll see you next week.
All right. People liked your kind of Marshall's dividing line on rares. So I wanted to actually go over Dominaria United, even, we're still in the midst of this format, but at this point you'll have played with or against pretty much every rare, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. If you haven't, you probably still can guess. So I'm going to look at some of the top ones. So something like, Denitha, Benalia's Hope, or Anointed Peacekeeper, these are clearly fine, right? You have no issue with those. So Archangel of Wrath, too good?
Too
the
good.
Right amount of good? Too good?
Way too good.
You would say Archangel of Wrath is good enough that it makes the format worse by existing.
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, that is the question.
Yeah. Can I say no?
You can say whatever you want.
God, that's really, really close. I'll say no, though. It's really, really powerful, but it is not so devastating that you don't feel like you can beat it. So no, it's okay. It's just really on that top end.
What about Sarah Paragon?
No, I don't think I've ever. That card's whatever, right? What does it do again?
Good.
What does it do again?
4 mana, 3/4 flying, and you can recast cards that cost 3 less.
That card is great. No, I'm still going to say no.
All right. Here's a good one. Blue, Sphinx of the Clear Skies.
I love that card. Yeah, that's a little too good. Yeah, I'd say the format's worse for having that here. Yeah.
Cool.
Doesn't need ward 2.
I assume Vidalian Mindsinger is fine. It's obviously very powerful, but you can just kill it and undo its effect.
Yes, and also the fact that it costs at least 2 separate colors, if not 3. Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah, still really great. But
Cruelty of Gix.
No, it's allowed to exist.
It is very good.
I hate it. I hate playing against it, and I never open it. But yeah,
the 3 life and the first 2 chapters being not board affecting, I think, makes this land in a great spot. Look, it's an A+. You should always take the card if you see it. But there are games where I've had this card be just a glorified zombify because I can't afford 3 life or doing nothing on the board.
Yeah.
And I think that is a cool aspect of the design. Of course, when you're playing control versus control and you both have a bunch of removal and they cast this, yes, you want to pack up your cards and go home. But that is
and I'm trying to make sure that I'm being balanced because often I am the grindy player on the other side who can't beat this card. But I mean, if I'm playing red-white, I'm like, that's fine. Like, please tap 5 mana to do one of those things,
Yeah. I mean, do I have to ask? Shieldred?
Too good.
Way too good.
Yeah.
Not even close.
Way too good.
So good that it's even tricked people into playing it in all the constructed formats, oddly enough. Elder Dragon War.
What is that one?
So chapter 1's 2 damage to each creature and opponent.
The 2 red one?
Chapter 2 is you can faithless looting any number of cards, and chapter 3 is make a 4/4.
I like that. No, that's good. I'm in for that card.
I assume Jaya is also fine.
Yep.
Shivan Devastator.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you lose to it a lot, but...
Okay, what about this one? Defiler of Vigor, the green one.
Too good.
Yeah. My experience with this is if someone casts this, then plays a creature, then the other person should just back it up.
Yeah. They just, they had a little bit of wiggle room with when this does happen, you get a bonus, and you can see how ludicrously pushed this one is compared to the others. Ping something for 1, or one of your guys gets +1/+1 in menace until the turn. This one's just like, your whole team's huge. Like, what? Like, it's out of whack. Yeah. I mean, this would have been very good if it was put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Like, that would have been totally fine.
Also, it's just kind of inexplicably a 6/6 trample.
Right.
When some of the other ones are like 4/3 flyers.
Right. This one plays much more like a mythic rare, and even then it would be too good, but it's just a regular rare. So yeah, way too good.
All right. So that's our second too good. Just that and Shieldred's. Oh, and Sphinx. Three so far. No other green cards really fit the bill, I wouldn't say. Yeah, none of the gold cards make it. I mean, unless you have an issue with Rith.
No.
Solkanar?
Nope.
I think Solkanar's awesome.
Me too. And also being straight up 3 colors, balances that out. You can't just throw it in any deck.
All right, not bad. So on the Marshall scale, this gets a 3. Only 3 of its rares and mythics are, you believe, making the set actively less good for
really limited. Good. No wonder I like this set so much.
I mean, there are a lot of cards like Archangel of Wrath, Cruelty of Gix that are like pretty close to the line. Elder Dragon War.
They're right there. Yeah.
But I like where you landed on those.
Sweet. This is a good set.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it and will continue to do so.